You can cry and cry until your eyes are red. You can toss and tumble on a sleepless bed, but you're wasting your time trying to lose.
Hello, are you still there, or have you just decided not to waste time and go and do something less boring instead?
Right, so I'm so sorry for that horrible hiatus. Samantha, our technical monkey, just put her finger into the wrong slot and it all went horribly wrong there for a moment. But we're going to go back to talking to Tom Bennett, who was so rudely interrupted. Remember, for those of you, anyone who's stuck around and is joining us, he's talking about his book, Running the Room. Tom, let me ask you about the title of the book, Running the Room, because you relay the story whereby you came by that title in the book, and it's a great story. I wonder if you could tell it for us now.
And there's not really a story. It's something that I got from nightclubs and so on, which is very few people know I used to run. And when I started running a nightclub, I realised that my job wasn't just to get people kind of drunk on sugary cocktails and do everything short of rob them. The job was actually to run the room itself. It wasn't just to get booze to people and to keep the doors open. It was to kind of synchronise everything. That there was a room and the space had to be run as a space. And I think it took me years to realise that was something which actually could map reasonably well onto the classroom. And because when you start teaching, of course, you go into the classroom and you're overwhelmed by the minutiae, the details, and that pupil's talking and that pupil's not working and so on. And it's when you get to be an experienced teacher, you start to see everything as a kind of a whole. But it's far too late by that point. You've already wasted about 5 years of your career. So that's the story. It's not a great story, but I'm glad you liked it.
Well, it's good enough, and maybe I misremembered it, but I remembered you talking about some sort of wise old Obi-Wan Kenobi figure in the nightclub business that taught you that piece of wisdom. But maybe that was just me projecting. So when you were trying to tell us and nobody could hear what you were saying that what made your approach to behaviour different from other people's that they might have experienced elsewhere, is that you're advocating that people actually and explicitly teach children to do the kinds of things that you want them to do.
Yeah, and when you think about it, it's absurd not to. Because if anybody was to do a job, whether it be a nightclub bouncer or an accountant, you would expect some kind of training before you were asked to do the job. But only in education do we sit students down and say, behave, when that doesn't take into account the fact that so many kids come from circumstances where behave means something very different to them. I mean, to them, behave might mean shout out for attention if you need it, or to somebody else it might be leave the classroom whenever you feel like it because that's what you're used to. So we're dealing with the habits these kids have already brought to school with them. And if we just assume they've all got the same beliefs, aptitudes, habits, and knowledge and skills about behaviour, then we're guaranteeing that the disadvantage gap will just become wider and wider and wider. So the moral of the story is if you want kids to behave really well, teach them the behaviour you want to see as opposed to just telling them the behaviour. Because if you tell somebody, it just goes in one ear and out the other.
Of a cover teacher, and I don't know if you've done cover, but some of us have in the dim and distant past. And going into a school, and you're talking about knowing the behaviour patterns of what happens in the school and how things are meant to work. A cover teacher goes in, and they don't often know that. So how do you envisage the kids should treat the cover teacher when they come in? Should they be in charge of the discipline? Should the discipline be within the child so the child knows how to behave? Or are they going to wreck the lesson for the cover teacher? Are they going to ruin the room? That's the one.
Well, there's different ways to look at this. The first way is that what a good school teacher should be doing and what a good school should be doing is teaching the children the habits and behaviours for when there's a cover lesson. Now, that's something that almost never happens. You should sit the kids down and say, right, I'm going to be away tomorrow. This is what I want to do and this is how I want to behave. And that will at least prompt them and cue them up to behave in that certain way. And also then the returning teacher needs to support the cover teacher by having some kind of liaison or making sure there's some kind of comm system between the two. But I'll tell you a trick I once heard which really, really helps cover teacher, which is if you can assign individual students in your class roles whenever they enter the classroom, so that one student might be the person who. Oh, hello, hang on. Yes, I can. So the one, well, that is live. So that one student, for example, hands the books out. One student gets the pens, and one student tidies up afterwards, and one student gives them the seating plan. Cover teachers will sing your praises in years to come. Is that okay, Ben? Have you got your gorilla? Ben's got his gorilla now. Just to clarify that for everyone. So that's my theory.
Good theory, and you've been over the last few years, as people will know, you've had various roles where you've been asked by the government to give advice on behaviour, and you're widely known and loved as the behaviours are. And in part of that role, you've been providing schools with some advice about how to handle reopening and how to reboot behaviour. Could you recap for those who don't know about that what that's advice?
To be honest, some of it isn't novel because a lot of it ties into what I was mentioning earlier on, which is you teach the behaviour you want to see. So if you want children to behave in slightly different ways because of COVID, if you want to teach them tactile etiquette or new respiratory etiquette, then you have to front load that in your relationship with them. A couple of things that we advise schools to be doing, which is to not assume that children are coming back traumatized, but to assume that they're actually probably mostly pretty keen to be back because of structure, meaning and purpose back in their life. Most kids are hungry for a wee bit of socialization with their friends, but also to be alive to the fact that some children will have been forced to endure toxic circumstances. And so there's a balance to be had, but not to tip into either one too much. Don't assume everyone's okay and don't assume everyone's been traumatized. And then teach the etiquette, teach the behavior, teach the staff to teach the behavior. Because there seems to be this assumption in schools that staff just know how to do it. They bloody well don't. They want line managers and leaders to teach them the things that are expected of them so they can then teach in turn to the pupils. And finally, there needs to be a follow-up and a follow-through. So whenever somebody challenges the new norms, there has to be challenge back to that. Now, it could be a consequence or a sanction or a reward, but it could just be a pastoral conversation. But the crucial thing is that people have to notice when things aren't normal and then push back on it. Kids can adapt to anything. As Camus said, eventually you could get used to anything. And I think that's something which is wonderful about the human spirit, that we're, very, very flexible and we can learn and we can adapt. But if you want to do it in a systematic way across a school, you have to approach it with a systematic strategy. It doesn't just happen by itself, and it doesn't just happen if you just tell them once.
So just not to assume that probably people are going to be well-intentioned, children are going to going back and wanting to make things work, but even with the best will in the world, they're going to make mistakes unless things are really, really clear, and they're going to forget. So,
and I would also suggest that schools take some breaches of the new etiquette really seriously so that kids understand it's serious. I mean, because for a lot of children, the threat of a virus which is potentially fatal is quite remote to many of them, but also very close to some of them who may have gone through shielding, or they may have gone through the bereavement and so on. But to make it real for children, you need to help them understand that using terms that they understand. So, for instance, say things like, "We need you to do this." And you got to sell the behaviour. You got to tell them why it's important. We need you to do this because we want your grandparents to live. Or something as blunt as that. We want them to be safe, and kids get that. Yeah, that matters to me. And that's when everyone is on the same page. But if kids think it's just some kind of 1 in a million chance, and the school acts like that too, then people will, pretend to spit on each other, and people will, high five each other and go to the toilets together and so on.
Yeah, I've been hearing already about some schools having to take a pretty dim view of the COVID cough and that sort of shenanigans.
That kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny, but it isn't very funny at all, so don't do it. Can we also ask you, the other role that you have, your other public-facing role, is as the Emperor of Research Ed.
Yes.
And during lockdown, there were quite a few Research Ed conferences which were cancelled for obvious reasons, and so there was a huge mobilisation of online love for Research Ed Home.
Yeah.
But the big question is, when do you anticipate conferences, starting up again? Is that something we can look forward to in the near future, or is that the more?
To be honest, you're asking me to be a prognosticator. Beyond
Yes.
what means here. When will conferences be allowed again? I have no idea. You have to ask
No.
Cummings. But I suspect that the minute that they are, we will do them, and we'll do them as safely as we possibly can. And to be honest, one of the kind of I hate to try to see silver linings in such a difficult circumstance for many people, but one of the nicest things about it was seeing people adapt. So we decided to do Research at Home and broadcast these free live sessions where people could do Q&A. And we had about, some days we had like over 1,000 people trying to get on it. And the views for, I think we've surpassed about 300,000 views now for the daily broadcast we did every day. And I've heard schools all around the world using it as part of their staff returns and their CPD and their ITT. So, that's incredibly edifying, and it really does make it all worthwhile. And it just shows that teaching and education is a profoundly collaborative and positive experience for most people. People are very happy to share. And I'm just happy that we had a kind of opportunity to try to help out to some extent. But we're doing more virtual research eds in the UK through 2020 because people that love doing them still want to do them. And probably 2021 we'll start seeing other ones happening. We've got one planned for Perth, but in Australia, where they're still allowed small conferences. So we're going to do a small face-to-face conference in Perth. Sadly, I won't be able to attend this one because of travel restrictions and whatnot. But it's exciting to think that these kind of things can still happen, while at the same time nice to see that we can explore other avenues and areas. And the Research Ed magazine's coming out again in a few weeks' time. So we're really focusing on the online experience and what we can do rather than what we can't do, which it's how we do it.
Absolutely. Well, Tom, I don't know if Martin, have you got anything else that you'd like to ask Mr. B before he has to?
Well, I just hope my question got through before the shenanigans with the sound. And thank you for your answers, Tom. It's lovely to see you. And
nice to see you again.
Martin, no one heard your question. So if you do,
right. Apparently, my question wasn't answered on live. So I asked you about the culture of the classroom and the importance about the culture of the school and whether culture is such an important word. If you want to just wrap about that a bit, just about culture as
this is like
the place that the teacher finds himself in, rather than each teacher to themselves trying to work on the discipline themselves.
Two things here very quickly. I noticed earlier on that teachers could have a huge impact on the culture of their own classroom. And the second thing I noticed was that leaders had a bigger impact. And that you could run a classroom effectively if you were a really, really talented teacher, but it would always be 10 times harder if the school wasn't run very well. And that ultimately the best way to get well-run classrooms and classroom cultures is for the whole school culture to be moderated by the leadership, because they're the ones that dictate the culture of the corridors, the public areas, the assemblies, the playground, and so on. No one teacher can do that. So they're the ones that set the standard for those parts of the school. They can also set the standard for the classrooms too, as long as the classroom teacher is plugging into the values and the norms, the routines that the leadership have laid out have to happen in every classroom. When everyone is singing off the same page, it's a wonderful thing. It hums. But when everyone's doing different things, it undermines everyone else, because consistency is key to normalizing certain behaviors. So as long as teachers are given a little bit of agency to operate within their classrooms and dictate some things that matter to them, and then the leaders then enact things which matter to them, and everyone follows suit, that's when cultures become quite firm, quite adamantine. That was a different answer to the one I gave you last time.
It was a different question. To be
fair. We're all grateful for the technical hit that we got that one. Tom, thank you so much for your time. This is the book that we've been talking about, Running the Room, published by our wonderful show sponsors, John Catt. And we've got a couple of copies to give away. So no royalties there, I'm afraid, Tom. And what we're going to do is, anyone who subscribes before the end of the weekend, we're going to trawl through whoever's subscribed to the channel and find some way. We're not quite sure how we go about this because we're such rank amateurs. but give away copies, and we'll announce on next week's show, if indeed there is a show next week, about who has won the copies of the book. But thanks again, Tom. That was sorry to have wasted your time. So
well, the show was called "It's Your Time to Waste Again."
Yeah, you knew what you were signing up for.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you later.
Bye-bye.
Wow. Okay. So we also this week, one of the Martin, one of the big events was happened in the select committee, the education select committee.
Yeah. I was interested in the Ofqual chair, Roger Taylor, going up in front of the education committee and talking about various things, but basically seems to be shifting some of the blame to Gavin Williamson, who at a similar sort of time was in the House of Commons answering questions and saying he was deeply sorry.
I think we've got a short clip, haven't we? Can we play the clip, Samantha?
Well, I don't know.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, this situation has, I know, caused a great deal of stress and uncertainty, and I'm deeply sorry that those who have borne the brunt of it have been students themselves. I can only apologise to them again for this. We took immediate action to provide certainty as soon as it was clear that if we didn't, too many students would have received grades that didn't reflect their hard work.
Let's get rid of Mr. Williamson. I think he's had enough time to explain his deep sorrow and to apologise to us all. But yeah, no, there's rather a lot of he said, they said, she said, but I did this and they knew that. Gavin's deeply sorry, Martin, but is he sorry enough? Should he be taking responsibility, do we think?
I'm not entirely sure about this. I mean, I think he should. Yes, he should take responsibility. I mean, I'm not in the Rees-Mogg school who said Gavin Williamson has done a first-class job under difficult circumstances. He's an A-star individual and an A-star Secretary of State, not on estimated grades, but on facts before us. I wouldn't go that far at all. But I think it is definitely shared blame for this. I think that certainly people in Ofqual didn't cover themselves in glory, and also because of the algorithm itself, when it was first mooted, it did seem to have some support outside of just the Secretary of State's head. I think the ASCL did a report on it, and the idea of what was going to come through, how to deal with the exams that aren't going to happen. And the ASCL said, we agree with the process outlined overall. In guidance issued to our members, we have emphasised the point that this is an exercise intended to replicate the grades students would have achieved if they had actually taken their exams. And this is the crucial problem. This is this is where the problem started, which is there's no exams, but we're still going to go ahead with giving grades.
And one of the things I found interesting from watching the select committee hearings, which, to be honest, is not something I normally do, but it was coming out that Ofqual had advised initially that exams could be delayed, or there could be some other kind of testing alternative, and they at least seemed to be saying that the algorithm, the estimating of grades, was a bit of a last resort. And obviously, we can all blame the pandemic because this was nobody's best option. But if they were advising against it, why was it the solution that went ahead?
Well, exactly. I mean, he did say it was a fundamental mistake, didn't he, to talk about, to make it idea this would ever be acceptable to the public or something like that, he said, which makes you wonder why anyone therefore thought it might be. So perhaps they said rather sorrowfully, OK, this is what we can do. But at somewhere along the line, either Roger Taylor is at fault, Gavin Williamson is at fault, the government is at fault, all of us in the education world were at fault at some point or something like that, or no one is. I mean, who if we're looking for blame, then I think it's quite a cultural thing. But Gavin Williamson, does the buck stop with him? Well, perhaps it should do, but I don't, perhaps they're trying to give the idea that this is some sort of cock up rather than a mistake made by a certain minister?
Well, I mean, it's certainly a cock-up, and the rights and wrongs of the decision-making process are put aside. It was immediately obvious as soon as the Scottish government decided to backtrack on their attempts at estimating grades that this was an inevitability, and the fact that then we had Gavin saying that this was all the triple lock stuff, and that this was cast iron, and he had full confidence in the algorithm, and then to have to U-turn does speak of something a little bit less than A star, doesn't it?
It certainly does for the minister involved, but interestingly, Roger Taylor himself isn't someone who's an expert in qualifications. I mean, interestingly enough, he failed his A-levels, or certainly didn't do as well as he intended to. And he doesn't have a background in education, doesn't have a background in grades, etc. Putting grades upon exams and whether they should come from algorithms left, right, and centre. I think he was a journalist for the Financial Times and then became a businessman selling something in healthcare or something like that. I don't know. But he's certainly you would think perhaps we need experts these days in these positions, and perhaps that might have helped if someone but there should be experts surely advising him within the whole system. I mean, even the I've forgotten her name. What was her name? Sally Collier. Even she's didn't have a background in qualifications, and
neither Michelle Meadows either. So so you're right. So maybe there's a problem with the way Ofqual's organised. Maybe they could have anticipated more of the problems that arose, but certainly from the ministerial angle, it could have been handled a lot more smoothly and a lot more elegantly. But the past is the past. Maybe you're right. Apportioning blame isn't really the point. Let's move on to something else now. And a regular slot that we're having in the show is, what has Martin been reading this week? Yeah, Martin, what have you been reading this week?
Well, I'm going to have a look at this book, The Lies That Bind, and something that interested me particularly that came up this week was the picture of Adele dressed up for the Notting Hill Carnival that wasn't, if you like, the Notting Hill Carnival that was online. And it upset lots of people because it was about cultural appropriation. And my go-to person on these issues at the moment is Mr. Kwame Anthony Appiah, and his wonderful book, The Lies That Bind. But he brings up lots of interesting things. But I want to say, why has this got to do with anything about education? Well, education seems to be embracing cultural appropriation and teaching it. I found quite a lot of materials on places like the TES resources site, and talking about cultural appropriation and why is it offensive, and why people take things from other cultures. So I want to give the focus on what we actually mean by cultural appropriation in the first instance. And the Oxford Dictionary defines it as follows: as the unacknowledged or inappropriate adoption of the customs, practices, ideas, etc. of one people or society by members of another, and typically more dominant people or society. And this whole thing has sort of got a bit out of control on social media this week, with people attaching all sorts of things to Adele's hairstyle and various things like that, Bantu knots, etc., and saying that this is absolutely taking from a culture, another culture. And there was a piece by Katie Edwards in The Independent about this thing yesterday, I think it was. So she's talking about a white woman's attempts to borrow culturally black hairstyles as a cool look without acknowledging its heritage would have been a consistent trope in popular culture, from the Kardashians to Rita Ora. It's unsurprising that Adele's post provoked an important conversation about white women's often clumsy attempts at solidarity and apparent inability to listen to those we claim to support. And I went to the Appiah because of this, because he talks about, do we own culture? Do we own it? Is a person's color means that they have this culture? A person's gender mean that they have this culture? Does culture belong to someone in the sense of ownership? And there's some wonderful quotes from his book, and I hope we've got two of them to show. I don't know if we have. We might have. We do. So perhaps put those up. One at a time. That'll be all right. Got them both up. Even better. So here we go. We've got the quotes from the Appiah book here about cultural appropriation. And he's talking very much about whether these things can actually be ours. And have a look at this. I can't actually see the quote myself that you've got there at the moment. So. Okay, so we should resist using the term cultural appropriation is the one that's up on the screen at the moment. And there's another one that's coming alongside it, which is, I hope, talking about...
Oh, come on, Samantha.
Okay,
so the second quote, Martin, let's just...
let's talk about it. I can't see it, so it's difficult for me to say. So
here it is.
Right, brilliant. They're both up there. So we've got this thing about ownership there as well. So is ownership the big problem of cultural appropriation? Can a white man play the blues would be an interesting question to run alongside it. Can someone adopt something from the culture that's not their own? Now, in this book, The Lies That Bind, Appiah talks very much about the golden nugget and tries to sort of say, well, was there a golden nugget that was dug out of the ground in ancient Greece and passed to the Romans, and then from the Romans passed on to the Italian Renaissance, passed on to the French, to Paris, to London, etc., and ending up perhaps somewhere further west, and sort of tying it into a Western idea. Is there such a thing as Western culture? And he sort of says, well, probably not. It's a big lie. And he talks about the lies that bind us all, and yet we seem to think these things are important. But if we start saying things are due to someone's race, someone's ethnicity, national status, or anything like that, I think today someone did a talk, I think it was Joe Biden, talking about the light bulb and saying the light bulb wasn't invented by Thomas Edison, it was invented by a black man, etc., etc. And we're trying all the time to make this connection between someone's ethnicity, someone's gender, and what they produced, as though that's what makes it worthwhile, what it actually is. And but we are not brought together. He makes the final point here, which is most important. What actually links us to these cultures and everything is learning, education, learning about. So what Shakespeare is to us is we have to learn about him. It's nothing to do with our race that makes him us, ours, or anything. It's about learning about him. And there was a lovely video about the far right going on a demonstration about Rule Britannia not being sung in the Albert Hall this year, perhaps. At the time, it was thought it wasn't going to be sung at all. And then they burst into song about Rule Britannia. And they go, Rule Britannia, Britannia, rule the waves, Britain. And they sort of forget the words. And it's that sort of thing that he points out, does anyone in the West actually know all the works that are meant to be part of Western culture? Does anyone know anything unless they learn about it? And learning is what connects us to culture, nothing particularly else about our internal selves, if you like.
Thanks, Martin. That's it's a great book, The Lies That Bind, by Kwame Anthony Appiah. And I haven't, the chapter on culture is the final chapter, and I haven't got to it yet. I've been reading it too. But for those of you who haven't got the book and would like to get some of Appiah's ideas, he did the Reef Lecture series in 2016, which are all on on iPlayer or whatever, the sound, BBC Sounds or whatever it is called. So you can listen to his ideas there, which are pretty much what he built upon in the book. And ever since Martin recommended the book to me a few weeks ago, and ever since I bought it and picked it up, I've not heard of Kwame Anthony Appiah before, and I've been seeing him all over the media, and he's got TED Talks, and he's a pretty prolific guy. Now, let's bring in our next guest, Naureen Khalid. Are you there, Naureen? Are you with us?
I am. Hi.
Excellent. I'm so sorry you've been waiting for so much longer than we would have wished, and thank you so much for your patience and forbearance.
Well, I would have tuned in to listen to you guys anyway, so it wasn't my time you were wasting.
Well, it was, but you just didn't mind. So, Naureen, have you come across Appiah before?
I haven't actually.
Appropriation.
I haven't. I've made a note of the book now, and it's going to go on my reading list. I haven't come across the book or his name. So yeah, thank you, Martin.
That's
I think
do you think there's something about what he's saying there about cultural appropriation that is of interest within schools, particularly because I see that schools teach this cultural appropriation is it's an actual thing, and yet here he is challenging it as though it might not be an actual thing, and perhaps it should be part of a discussion in schools rather than something that's taught as a factual thing, if you like. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I must say this, that I'm here as myself. I'm not representing any governing body or any organization or any group I may be associated with. I don't buy into cultural appropriation. I think a better term is cultural appreciation. If I were to wear something belonging to another culture, make fun of it by wearing it, that's a different thing. But if I'm just wearing it because I like it, I think that's fine. And therefore, yes, there should be a discussion about it, an open, frank discussion, robust discussion, rather than just saying, don't do it because it's cultural appropriation. And while you were talking about this, I thought to myself that if somebody from the West, especially a woman, were to go to Pakistan, she wouldn't wear a miniskirt and walk down the street just because it's not done there. So she might wear a shalwar kameez. Now that's not cultural appropriation, is it? It's being respectful. So if we say that cultural appropriation is anybody who dresses up or who uses any forms of culture from another culture, that's wrong. What would she need to do in order to fit in and not not be disrespectful while she's walking down the street in Karachi?
Yeah, it's a
good point.
It's an interesting point he brings up. There are three things, if you like, that make us work in this way on identity, and the three things are identification and the fact that people are labeled and label themselves. So they are internalized labels, and then also labels that are given by other people. Now, the way that they treat someone because of the way they look or their gender, etc. Now, he says the important thing about all these three things is that they are contested. Therefore, they're lies. They're not these big stories. They are contested stories and it's the contestation that makes them, and arbitrary. Some of them, but the fact that they're contested is quite important. But he also talks about the way that we, perhaps politics as well, that you could be a liberal or conservative, and you can look at the other side and think of them as stupid and deluded and all that. And he's a bit like Joe Cox, I think, about saying the things that, fewer things divide us than bring us together. I can't remember the quote there. Mm. But do you think identity politics, to some extent, fueled by social media and other things like that,
absolutely
is making things more difficult, certainly in education, to really deal with these issues in a sober and thoughtful way?
Absolutely. There seems to be more heat in the debate. We don't seem to be able to talk about. I'm not saying don't have a discussion on, say, cultural appropriation. I mean, listen to both sides and let both sides have their say. It seems, don't just start off from the position that you can't say anything. Let's have a debate about it, and let's come to some a place where we can talk about of these things without taking up arms, so to speak.
Lovely. Thank you. The main job and the main reason you're here is you're a governor in a school in we'll call it London, Greater London, somewhere in the Great Conurbation. Can you tell me what you've noticed over the past week or so, perhaps working up to this week, about how schools have been trying to deal with the current crisis? I'm going to call it crisis, but tell me, how's the school? Perhaps because you have networks of other governors about as well. What you've heard?
Well, schools have. One of my schools went back Wednesday. The other one went back today. So as governors, we are letting, or at least I hope all governors are letting heads sort of get on with the job and not demand answers right in the first week. We've prepared a lot to open up. Heads and the teams have done risk assessments, which have come to governors and the governing bodies. We have had meetings. We've talked through this risk assessments. We've played various scenarios. We've had, what happens if what is your plan A for opening? What if that goes wrong? Do you have a plan B? We've talked about that. I think the first meetings we have will be the ones where we will ask, did everything go to plan? Did you have you had to modify some of your plans? Is it working like you hoped it has? What have the numbers been like? How do staff feel? Do they feel safe? Do they feel happy about coming back and teaching? What about parents? How do they feel? What about students? So I think the reflection will have to wait for a week or so till the school has been operating as normal for a week or so before we can say anything about how the first week has been. And I think governors should really not demand answers right now. Let the heads get on with their jobs and give them time and space to do it, and then ask how it has been.
When you're talking about plan Bs, what sort of plan B could you give us some sort of idea without perhaps the full details of it? What do you mean by what plan B might be?
Well, for example, if we had looking at various government guidance, you had, the plan A was having everybody in bubbles, thinking of secondary schools, how do you operate? In primary schools, the whole form will move together. That's slightly easier to handle and make bubbles of. But in secondary schools, if especially in the upper years, when you have students in the same form taking different subjects, how do we work around that? So they might have had, do we have everybody bubbles made of subject areas, or bubbles made of form rooms? If it's form rooms, how do we do that? Does the teacher come to each class, or do we have students going from room to room? It's these sorts of things which everybody has had to think about. Do we have a one-way system around the school? Will that work or not? If it doesn't, how do we cope with that? Break times, lunch times, do we make students go out? Do we let them stay in? If we let them stay in, what implication does that have for cleanliness, deep cleaning, etc.? If we make them go out, is there enough space outside? Is there space outside to go or not? So it's these things, which have to be which they have had to think about.
Well, so Naureen, one of the big questions that I think lots of people are concerned about is, and we've got a little title for this, is what happens when the infection rate rises, when the numbers go up? What sort of planning, what sort of contingency is in place?
We will have to see what happens. And we have to go by government guidance as well. What the government says. If the government says, schools need to open up just for children of essential workers, that's we need to be able to work with that. Do we have online lessons prepared if we have to shut down schools again? Do we have enough online resources prepared? Do we have? Does each child have access to online resources, or yes or not? It's all of those things which we'll have to think about again if the infection rate goes up.
Yes, I mean obviously we as always we should hope for the best but plan for the worst, and I think that probably, and I don't know if you could say something about this from a governor's perspective, I imagine lots of schools will have learned an incredible amount over the past 6 months or so about how to do things differently. What sort of lessons do you think will be particularly useful to have as contingency?
Well, how did that work while you were in lockdown? Yeah, normally you would have children in front of you. The safeguarding leads will be able to track each child would be able to have conversations. That could not happen while we were in lockdown. So we've had to work around that and make sure that we do have some idea of what's happening to particular children, especially those really vulnerable ones. I think working with other agencies has been quite good. We've had one of my schools has had to liaise really closely with social services because of few vulnerable children. So that's something we've learned how to do, and we've had to learn really quickly how to do that.
Yes.
Yes, the safeguarding was.
And it's very, very important. Yeah, no, that's a really important point that maybe people are not focused on all of the time, especially when they're in the classroom. This week, we've heard a little bit more about Ofsted's plans up until December, and that they're not going to be doing inspections; they're going to be doing visits, and that. One of the decisions made, which is a little bit controversial perhaps, is that they'll be writing to parents to give them details of the findings during those visits. Have you got any thoughts on whether this is a good idea, or whether maybe Ofsted should take more of a light touch approach?
If they are going in, and if it is light touch, as they've said it would be, that they are just going to go in and they're not expecting school leaders to have data ready, or it's not going to be like an inspection, then I think I know NGA and NAHD, etc., have written a letter today saying that they are disappointed about the fact that Ofsted are going in. But on the flip side, I think Ofsted hasn't been in for 6 months or so. Again, safeguarding. How do we know that the school has looked after children?
Right.
Yeah. So.
Well, it's a difficult balance to get right, isn't it? Then, if you're saying that they need to visit but it's not an inspection, but they might need to look closely, perhaps, at certain things, then perhaps it is an inspection. And can Ofsted ever visit a school without it not being semi-formal? Like if the Queen came around to our houses, we, just because she just wanted to borrow some sugar, we'd still be on our best behaviour, wouldn't we? We'd try to show our best side, perhaps, depending, unless we're ultra Republicans, of course.
The other thing is,
can Ofsted ever be neutral when they come around to a school and not be inspecting, just visiting?
That's a good question. The first question is, can Ofsted actually go in? Do they have powers to go in if it's not an inspection visit? I don't know what the law is on that. If it's not a Section 5 and 8, can an inspector ring the head and say, I'm coming in? Would the head be within their powers? Actually,
I think I've read, Naureen, that heads have the power to defer. So if Ofsted do phone and it's really not a good time, they're allowed to say, actually, this isn't going to work for us. But one of the maybe more concerning.
it to be deferred. If I just ring you and say I'm coming in for a chat, can I come in for a chat? Can you say, actually, I don't want to chat with you?
Well, no, I mean that's tricky, isn't it? And one of the things which maybe is maybe the sort of the darker end of all of this is that if the visit goes badly, then it can turn into a full Section 5 inspection.
But and that's the reason why I'm sort of in two minds about this. If it has gone really badly, if it was because of safeguarding concerns, now would I rather that they hadn't gone in, or would I feel more comfortable that it is turned into a Section 5 and that is looked at more thoroughly?
Yeah, yes, it's as you said, Martin, a really delicate, important balance. That we don't want safeguarding concerns not to go unaddressed. They're probably too important, and yet there's this sensitivity, this sort of treading carefully that we're not doing proper inspections. We're just doing, what did you put it, just visiting.
Yes, that's it. What would you both like if you were a parent and your school was visited? Would you like to receive the letter, or would you just say, fine, they've been in, they've gone back, and I'm happy with that? Or would you like to know what had happened?
Yeah. So I think I'd be happy under the circumstances at the moment just to not know the details, unless obviously if things were awful, and in which case that would be immediately apparent because a full inspection would be then forthcoming. But I think as a parent, I'd be quite happy not to feel that I needed the details of an Ofsted visit in these circumstances. What about you, Martin?
It's an interesting one. Speaking, because I am a parent, of course. I've heard
that.
Yeah, it's only two days back so far. But if Ofsted came in next week, I think the thing that would most interest me would be how's the arrangements for COVID-19 going within the school. That would be the most relevant thing. Is there social distancing? Are things being done in a basic health and safety sort of report? And if the school wasn't doing that, then it would be quite interest to me. But I don't think at this moment anything else really should venture into it.
The informal feedback that I've had from one of my daughters is that there are very clear social distancing guidelines, and there are all sorts of measures in place, and yet young people seem to find a way to cram it into small areas, lick each other, and what have you.
Excuse me.
And she's been aware of that some of the measures that her school have put in place have seemed to lead to, inadvertently, to sort of less social distancing than might have been wished for. But it's difficult. These schools are. It's like a plumbing system that you've designed very carefully, and then suddenly you're putting water through at pressure, and you're going to find the leaks. And
these are early days.
What's going to happen over the next few? Yeah, they are early days, and we're all going to be learning a lot. So,
are people going to keep to the rules as time goes by, I suppose?
Well, this is really interesting. I mean, if you look at wider society, I'm really struck by this. I lived in Japan years and years ago, 20 years ago, for a while, and to see people wearing masks on the street was pretty normal. And now it's pretty normal to see people wearing masks on the street here in the UK, which is never something that probably any of us expected. So, Naureen, you said earlier, that now is not the right time for governors to be asking questions from head teachers about how's it all going. When will you be wanting that kind of information? When is a reasonable
I think I will wait for my first meeting, which should be happening somewhere in second, third week of September. That is when the heads have had a chance to. The schools have been open for 2 or 3 weeks. The heads have had a chance to put the plans into action, to reflect on the plans, to see what's gone wrong, what's gone well. and then report back. And the other thing is we'll have to look at our meeting agendas. We again, which is what we did during the lockdown, is have meetings, but have them, have them on Zoom, obviously, or any other platform. But keep the agendas really tightly focused, not to ask, demand too much data from the heads, which they might not have at the minute.
So, Naureen, have you actually been physically to either of the schools that you're a governor of?
I haven't, not since the lockdown. No. I've had meetings over online meetings. I've done one interview for a SLT position that was online as well, but no, I haven't been in. I've done even safeguarding meetings. I've done that online as well. So we haven't been.
Are you missing it?
I am. Yes, that's one of the best bits of being a governor is to go into school. And one of the times when this is the primary school I was a governor in, and we went in to chat to the head, and there was a knock on the door, and there was a year 1 or maybe year 2 girl standing there, and she said, "Can I come in and show you something?" So we had it was a appointment manners, but we hadn't started that. So he said, "Yes, come in." And she had brought in an English book. Her handwriting. She wanted to show how her handwriting had improved. And she was, she just wanted to show it to the head. She wanted to show it to the governors and everybody, and that was really, really lovely to see. And yes, I missed that.
Noreen, that's a lovely story there. Could you give me some idea as to why anyone should want to become a governor? Is it moments like that make it all worthwhile? What are the sorts of things that you get out of being a governor?
It's moments like that. Obviously, it's also giving back, using your skills in a different field. You may have skills which you use in your day job, which can translate into governance. It's learning new skills yourself. If you as a governor, you learn how to do strategic thinking, how to plan for the next year, next 3 years, next 5 years. That's a skill which you pick up and you learn after being on the board as well. You learn how to operate as a team. You learn what's being part of what is meant by being part of a corporate body. So there are lots of skills that you pick up as well, and the school benefits from your skills. So it's a win-win for both sides, and everybody should be a governor.
What do you think, Noreen? What would you say is the most important character trait or quality that governors need to have? What would you most look for?
Ability to listen and ability to ask questions. So no, even if you are not in education, so you don't know the data. If you can sort of ask questions which bring out what's happening behind the data, that's a good skill to have. So being able to listen, being able to work as part of a team, and being able to ask questions.
Lovely.
Brilliant. Noreen, thanks so much for your time. Thanks for coming on your show. Thanks for allowing us to waste your time this afternoon. And so, Noreen, there talking about going back to school. You've been back to school this week, haven't you, Martin? You've done some training face to face.
I actually did. I actually went into a real school and stood in front of real teachers and socially distanced distance. Yes, a socially distanced distance. So
were you behind perspex?
No, I wasn't behind perspex, funny enough. Nor was I masked up when I did the talk. But I was certainly well away from or they were well away from me. So
right, well, as is only wise.
but it needed a big hall. So and booming across a big hall, and it was lovely, and it was good to see. It was good to put on a tweed jacket again. Actually, I haven't done that for 6 months, I think. So that was fun, certainly, and. I don't know if many schools, because I've got some other gigs coming up, which are all mainly online, actually. But I hope to get back into some schools as soon as possible. But I don't mind doing the things online, but I do prefer a live audience if I can.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I'm very jealous because I haven't been into a school yet. I've spent the week on doing webinars and Zooms and all of this, and it feels like lockdown still in. But I'm still locked down, Martin. I think lots of people may be quite thankful for that, and I should, I got that. I did have one opportunity to wear a suit during lockdown. My mum got married, which was fun as soon as she was allowed to, as soon as the marriage ban was lifted. But no, you're right. Just sitting around still in my jeans and t-shirt. If those, just in my pants sometimes.
I don't really need to know that at all. But I'm going to pick up something from Naureen there about listening and asking questions, and hopefully we'll get better at asking questions as time goes by. And also, perhaps listening has been a bit difficult today because we went out with no sound at the beginning. So
yeah, thank you everyone for bearing with us.
Definitely need to work on those.
But thanks very much for staying with us. Please subscribe. If you do subscribe, we'll be in the draw to win a copy of Tom Bennett's fantastic new book, Running the Room. And hopefully you haven't had too traumatic an experience, and you will be back next week for another helping of
It's Your Time You're Wasting.
You're wasting. Good night.
Good night.